The cold February wind cut through her thin jacket like a knife. She pulled her knees closer to her chest and wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold on to whatever warmth was left in her body. The cardboard she sat on was damp from last night's rain, and she could feel the cold seeping through her jeans. Her name was Maya, and she was 17 years old. But if you asked the hundreds of people who walked past her every single day, they wouldn't be able to tell you that. They wouldn't be able to tell you anything about her at all, because to them, she didn't exist. She had learned this truth 3 years ago, when she first found herself on these streets. People don't see what they don't want to see. A homeless teenager sitting outside a busy train station was not something anyone wanted to see, so they looked right through her, like she was made of glass. Like she was nothing more than a shadow on the sidewalk. Maya watched a mother walk by, holding her daughter's hand. The little girl couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. She wore a bright pink coat and matching boots, and she was telling her mother something exciting about school. The mother smiled down at her, and Maya felt something twist in her chest. She remembered what that felt like, having someone who loved you, having someone who cared whether you were cold or hungry or scared, having a home to go back to at the end of the day. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. A different girl. A girl who no longer existed. 3 years ago, Maya Chen was not invisible. 3 years ago, she was extraordinary. She had discovered the piano when she was just 4 years old. Her mother had taken her to a friend's house, and there was an old, upright piano in the living room. While the adults talked in the kitchen, little Maya had climbed onto the bench and pressed a single key. The sound that came out was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. She pressed another key, then another, and something clicked inside her brain that she couldn't explain. It was like the piano was speaking to her in a language only she could understand. Her mother found her 20 minutes later, picking out a simple melody with both hands. She hadn't been taught a single note. She just knew. That was the day everything changed. Maya's mother worked 2 jobs to pay for piano lessons. She cleaned houses during the day and worked at a restaurant at night. She was exhausted all the time, but she never complained. Every time Maya learned a new piece, every time she mastered a difficult passage, her mother would sit in their tiny living room and listen with tears in her eyes. By the time Maya was 8, she was winning local competitions. By 10, she was performing at concert halls across the state. By 12, she received the invitation that would change her life forever. Carnegie Hall, the most famous concert venue in the world. They wanted her to perform. Maya still remembered standing on that stage, looking out at the sea of faces in the audience. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. But then she saw her mother in the front row, and everything else faded away. She sat down at the piano and began to play. And for the next 15 minutes, she wasn't a 12-year-old girl from a tiny apartment in Brooklyn. She was something more. Something magical. Her fingers flew across the keys like they had a mind of their own, creating sounds that made grown men weep and critics scramble for their notebooks. When she finished, the silence lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Then the entire audience rose to their feet, and the applause was so loud it seemed to shake the walls. That night, her mother held her face in both hands and said, "You are going to do great things, my love. The whole world is going to know your name." Maya believed her. Why wouldn't she? Everything was perfect. Everything was possible. But life has a way of taking everything away when you least expect it. 6 months after Carnegie Hall, Maya's mother started getting headaches. At first, they both thought it was just stress. She was still working 2 jobs, still exhausted all the time. She needed rest, that was all, but the headaches got worse. Then came the dizziness. Then came the day she collapsed at work and had to be rushed to the hospital. The doctors used words that Maya didn't understand. Words like tumor and inoperable and aggressive. But she understood the look on her mother's face when she came out of the doctor's office. She understood what that look meant. They had 6 months, the doctor said, maybe less. The medical bills started piling up almost immediately. Insurance covered some of it, but not enough. Never enough. Maya's mother had to quit her jobs because she was too sick to work. They fell behind on rent. Then they fell further behind. Then the eviction notice arrived, and they had to move into a smaller apartment. Then an even smaller one. Maya stopped playing piano. She couldn't concentrate. She couldn't think about music when her mother was dying right in front of her. She spent every moment she could by her mother's side, holding her hand, reading to her, pretending that everything was going to be okay. Her mother passed away on a Tuesday morning in March. Maya was 14 years old. She had no father. He had left before she was born, and her mother had never talked about him. She had no other family, no aunts or uncles or grandparents who could take her in. She had nothing, and no one. The state tried to put her in foster care, but Maya ran. She was too broken, too scared, too angry at the world. She thought she could survive on her own. She thought the streets couldn't be worse than losing everything she had ever loved. She was wrong. The first winter nearly killed her. She learned quickly that being homeless wasn't just about being cold and hungry. It was about being invisible. It was about watching people look right through you like you weren't even human. It was about losing pieces of yourself every single day until you forgot who you used to be. 3 years passed. 3 years of shelters and soup kitchens and cold nights on the street. 3 years of being nobody. Maya hadn't touched a piano since her mother's funeral. She couldn't. The very thought of it made her chest ache with a pain she couldn't describe. Music had been their thing, hers and her mother's. Playing without her felt like a betrayal, but she still heard it. Every night, when she closed her eyes and tried to sleep, she heard piano music in her head. Sometimes it was Chopin. Sometimes it was Beethoven. Sometimes it was pieces she had composed herself, back when she believed she had a future. In her dreams, she still played. In her dreams, her mother was still alive, sitting in the front row, crying with pride. But then she would wake up, and she would remember that dreams were just dreams, and she would remember that she was invisible. On this particular February morning, Maya had no idea that her life was about to change forever. She didn't know that in just a few hours, she would walk into a place she didn't belong and ask a question that would shock everyone who heard it. She didn't know that 3 simple words would give her back everything she had lost. All she knew, sitting there on that cold, damp cardboard, was that she needed to find somewhere warm. The temperature was dropping, and if she stayed outside much longer, she might not make it through the night. So she stood up on shaky legs, gathered her few belongings into her worn backpack, and started walking. She didn't have a destination in mind. She never did. But something was pulling her forward, something she couldn't explain, and without knowing why, she turned toward the center of the city, where the tall buildings sparkled with lights and warmth, where a piano was waiting for her, where everything was about to change. Maya walked for almost an hour before she found it. The Grandview Hotel stood on the corner of Fifth Avenue like a palace from another world. It was one of those old buildings that looked like it belonged in a movie. Tall stone columns framed the entrance. Golden lights glowed from every window. A red carpet stretched from the front doors all the way to the street, where expensive cars were pulling up one after another. Maya stopped across the street and watched. Men in black suits stepped out of shiny cars and offered their hands to women in beautiful gowns. Diamonds sparkled around necks and wrists. Fur coats draped over shoulders. Everyone was smiling, laughing, greeting each other with kisses on the cheek like old friends. It was a different universe. A universe where people had never known cold or hunger or loneliness. A universe where Maya didn't exist. She should have kept walking. She knew that. There was a shelter about 20 blocks south that sometimes had open beds on nights like this. If she hurried, she might be able to get a spot before they filled up, but her feet wouldn't move. Something about the hotel pulled at her. Maybe it was the warmth she could almost feel radiating from those golden windows. Maybe it was curiosity about how the other half lived. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something she couldn't name. A gust of wind hit her hard, and Maya shivered so violently that her teeth rattled. Her fingers were turning blue. She couldn't feel her toes anymore. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees in the last hour, and the sun was already setting. She needed to get warm. Just for a few minutes. Just long enough to stop shaking. Before she could talk herself out of it, Maya crossed the street. The doorman was busy helping an elderly couple out of their car. He didn't notice the thin girl in the worn jacket slip past him and through the revolving door. The moment Maya stepped inside, she felt like she had entered a dream. The lobby was enormous. The ceiling stretched up at least 3 stories high, painted with angels and clouds like some kind of church. Crystal chandeliers hung down like frozen waterfalls, casting rainbows of light across the marble floors. Fresh flowers sat in golden vases on every table. The air smelled like perfume and money. Maya stood just inside the door, afraid to move. She was painfully aware of how she must look. Her jacket was stained and torn at the sleeve. Her jeans hadn't been washed in weeks. Her hair was tangled and dirty, pulled back in a messy ponytail. She had tried to clean herself up in a gas station bathroom that morning, but there was only so much she could do. She didn't belong here. Anyone could see that, but she was warm. For the first time in hours, she was actually warm. The heat from the building wrapped around her like a blanket, and she felt her frozen muscles slowly start to relax. Just a few minutes, she told herself. Just a few minutes to warm up, and then she would leave. Maya moved deeper into the lobby, trying to look like she belonged. She kept her head down and walked with purpose, like she knew exactly where she was going. She had learned that trick early on. If you acted like you were supposed to be somewhere, people were less likely to question you. The lobby was crowded with guests, heading toward a set of large double doors on the far side. Maya could hear music and laughter coming from inside. Some kind of party, she figured. The fancy people and their fancy party. She found a quiet corner near a large potted plant and sat down on a velvet bench. Her legs ached with relief. She couldn't remember the last time she had sat on something so soft. From her spot, she could see the entire lobby. She watched the rich people float by in their gowns and suits, completely unaware of her existence. A waiter walked past with a tray of champagne glasses. A woman laughed too loudly at something her husband said. 2 men in matching tuxedos shook hands and slapped each other on the back. Maya watched it all like it was a movie playing on a screen. None of it felt real. None of it had anything to do with her, and then she saw it. In the corner of the lobby, just past the double doors where the party was happening, sat a piano. Maya's breath caught in her throat. It was a grand piano. A Steinway, if she had to guess. The most beautiful instrument she had ever seen. Its black surface was so polished that it reflected the chandeliers above like a mirror. The keys were perfectly white, perfectly clean, perfectly waiting. Something stirred inside Maya's chest. Something she hadn't felt in 3 years. She stood up without meaning to. Her feet carried her forward before her brain could stop them. She moved through the crowd like a ghost. Her eyes locked on the piano, unable to look away. She got closer. 10 feet, 5 feet, 3 feet. She could see every detail now. The gold lettering on the side that spelled out Steinway and Sons. The smooth curve of the lid, propped open to reveal the strings inside. The bench, pushed neatly under the keys, waiting for someone to pull it out and sit down. Maya's fingers tingled. Her hands actually ached with the need to touch those keys. It was a physical sensation, like hunger or thirst. Like her body was remembering something her mind had tried to forget. She hadn't played in 3 years. Not since her mother's funeral. She had told herself she would never play again. Music belonged to her old life. Her old self. The girl who played piano at Carnegie Hall was dead. She had died the same day her mother did. But standing here, looking at this beautiful instrument, Maya felt something crack inside her. A wall she had built around herself. A wall that had kept her safe and numb for 3 long years. She wanted to play. She needed to play. The desire was so strong it scared her. Her hand reached out toward the keys. "Can I help you?" The voice made Maya jump. She spun around and found herself face to face with a security guard. He was a large man with a stern face and a uniform that made him look official and intimidating. His eyes moved up and down, taking in her dirty jacket, her worn shoes, her tangled hair. His expression shifted from polite to suspicious in about half a second. "Are you a guest here?" he asked. His tone said he already knew the answer. Maya opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her heart was pounding. Her face felt hot with shame. "I don't think you're supposed to be here," the guard said. He took a step closer. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Maya looked back at the piano. It was right there, so close she could touch it. The keys seemed to glow under the chandelier light, calling to her, begging her to play. Just one song, she thought. If she could just play one song, maybe she could feel like herself again. Maybe she could remember who she used to be. But that was crazy. She was a homeless girl in a fancy hotel. She had no right to touch that piano. She had no right to be here at all. "Come on," the guard said. His hand moved toward her arm. "Let's go. Nice and quiet. No trouble. No trouble." Maya should have gone. She should have let him lead her back to the street where she belonged. She should have accepted that this world was not her world and never would be again. But something inside her refused to give up. Maybe it was the memory of her mother, sitting in the front row at Carnegie Hall, crying with pride. Maybe it was the ghost of the girl she used to be. The girl who made grown men weep with her music. Maybe it was simply the fact that she had nothing left to lose. Whatever it was, it made her do something crazy. Instead of walking toward the exit, Maya took a step toward the piano. The guard's eyes widened. "Hey! Hey! Stop!" But Maya didn't stop. She pulled out the bench and sat down before anyone could grab her. The guard reached for her shoulder. Other guests were starting to notice. A woman nearby gasped. A man shook his head in disgust. Someone called out for more security, but Maya wasn't paying attention to any of them. She was looking at the keys, 88 of them, stretching out before her like old friends she hadn't seen in years. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was racing so fast she thought she might pass out. The guard's fingers closed around her arm. "You need to leave right now." Maya looked up at him. Then she looked around at all the faces staring at her with shock and disapproval. The rich people in their expensive clothes. The waiters with their silver trays. The whole beautiful, glittering world that had never seen her and never would. And then she asked the question that would change everything. 3 simple words that came out barely louder than a whisper. "Can I try?" The words hung in the air like smoke. "Can I try?" The security guard stared at Maya like she had just spoken in a foreign language. His grip on her arm loosened slightly, not because he was letting go, but because he was too confused to hold on tight. "What did you say?" he asked. Maya swallowed hard. Her throat was dry. Her voice came out shaky and small, but she forced herself to repeat it. "Can I try? Just one song, please. Then I'll leave. I promise I'll leave. And I won't cause any trouble. Just let me play one song." The guard shook his head slowly, like he was dealing with someone who had lost their mind. And maybe she had. Maybe she had finally snapped after 3 years on the streets. Maybe this was what going crazy felt like. "Listen, kid," he said, his voice a little softer now. "This piano is worth more than you can imagine. I can't just let some random person walk in off the street and start banging on it. You understand?" Maya flinched at the words. Random person. Off the street. She knew what he really meant. Homeless. Dirty. Nobody. "I know how to play," she said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt it. I just want to play one song." "I'm sure you do," the guard said. But his tone made it clear he didn't believe her. Why would he? She looked like she hadn't showered in days. Her clothes were practically falling apart. Girls who looked like her didn't play pianos in fancy hotels. Girls who looked like her belonged outside, where no one had to see them. By now, a small crowd had gathered around them. Party guests in their beautiful clothes stood in a circle, watching the scene unfold like it was entertainment. Some of them looked annoyed, others looked amused. A few were already whispering to each other behind their hands. Maya heard bits and pieces of what they were saying. "Security really needs to do a better job. How did she even get in here? This is ridiculous. Just get her out. Probably looking to steal something." Each word hit Maya like a punch to the stomach. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to melt into the floor and vanish completely. This had been a mistake. A stupid, crazy mistake. What had she been thinking? The guard tugged at her arm again. Okay. Let's go. Show's over. Maya started to stand. Her eyes were burning with tears she refused to let fall. She would not cry in front of these people. She would not give them the satisfaction. And then a voice cut through the crowd. Wait. Everyone turned to look. The crowd parted like a curtain, and an elderly woman stepped forward. She was small and thin, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant twist. Her gown was emerald green, simple but clearly expensive. Diamonds sparkled at her ears and throat, but it wasn't her clothes or jewelry that made people move out of her way. It was the way she carried herself, like she owned the place, which, as Maya would later learn, she did. The woman walked straight up to Maya and looked at her. Really looked at her. Not through her. Not past her. But directly at her. It was the first time in 3 years that someone had looked at Maya like she was an actual human being. "What's your name, dear?" the woman asked. Her voice was gentle, but firm. "Maya," she whispered. "Maya." The woman repeated the name like she was testing how it sounded. "And you want to play the piano?" Maya nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. The woman studied her for a long moment. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, taking in every detail. The worn jacket, the dirty shoes, the desperation written all over Maya's face. "Mrs. Chen," the security guard said nervously, "I really don't think this is a good idea. We don't know who this girl is or where she came from. She could damage the instrument, or cause a scene, or..." The woman held up one hand, and the guard stopped talking immediately. "I appreciate your concern," she said calmly, "but I would like to hear this young lady play." A murmur went through the crowd. Some people looked shocked, others looked curious. A few looked downright offended that this dirty street girl was being given a chance to touch their precious piano. Maya couldn't believe what was happening. She stared at the woman with wide eyes, certain she had heard wrong. "Really?" she asked. "You'll let me play?" The woman smiled. It was a small smile, but it reached her eyes. "I've learned something in my 82 years on this earth," she said. "You can't always tell a book by its cover. Sometimes the most extraordinary things come from the most unexpected places." She gestured toward the piano. "Go ahead, dear. Show us what you can do." Maya's heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her hands were trembling. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment, but she turned back to the piano. The crowd had grown even larger now. Word had spread through the party that something interesting was happening in the lobby. People were pouring out of the ballroom to see what all the fuss was about. There had to be at least 100 people watching now, maybe more. Maya sat down on the bench. The leather was cool and smooth beneath her. She adjusted her position, finding the right distance from the keys. Just like her old teacher had taught her years ago, she placed her fingers on the keys. The ivory was cold against her skin. She had forgotten how that felt. How right it felt. Like her hands had finally found the place they were always meant to be. The room went quiet. So quiet that Maya could hear her own breathing. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Most of them expected nothing. They expected her to bang out some clumsy tune and embarrass herself. They expected to laugh and shake their heads and go back to their champagne and caviar. Maya closed her eyes. For a moment, she couldn't move. Fear had frozen her solid. 3 years without playing. 3 years without music. What if she had forgotten everything? What if her fingers didn't remember what to do? What if she made a fool of herself in front of all these people? But then she thought about her mother. She thought about sitting in their tiny apartment, practicing for hours while her mother listened from the kitchen. She thought about the way her mother would hum along when Maya played her favorite pieces. She thought about Carnegie Hall, and the look on her mother's face when the audience stood up and cheered. She thought about the last words her mother ever said to her. "You are going to do great things, my love. The whole world is going to know your name." Maya took a deep breath, and she began to play. The first note rang out through the silent lobby like a bell, clear and pure and perfect. Then came the second note, and the third, and suddenly her fingers were moving on their own, dancing across the keys like they had never stopped, like the last 3 years had never happened. She was playing Chopin. Ballade Number 1 in G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces ever written for piano. It was also her mother's favorite. The music poured out of her like water from a broken dam. All the pain, all the loneliness, all the grief she had been carrying for 3 years came flooding through her fingers and into the keys. She played with her eyes closed. She didn't need to see. The music was inside her, had always been inside her, waiting for this moment. The crowd stood frozen. Not a single person moved. Not a single person breathed. Because what they were hearing was not what they had expected. What they were hearing was not some clumsy street girl banging on keys she didn't understand. What they were hearing was magic, and they knew it. Maya didn't see their faces change. She didn't see the woman in diamonds lower her champagne glass with trembling hands. She didn't see the man in the expensive suit wipe a tear from his eye. She didn't see the security guard standing with his mouth hanging open, unable to believe what he was witnessing. She didn't see any of it, because she wasn't in the Grandview Hotel anymore. She was home. She was 12 years old again, and her mother was sitting in the front row, crying with pride, just like she always did. The music swelled and soared, filling every corner of that grand lobby, reaching up to the painted angels on the ceiling and down to the cold marble floors. And for the first time in 3 years, Maya was not invisible. For the first time in 3 years, everyone could see her. They just couldn't believe what they were seeing. The music filled every corner of that grand lobby like water filling a glass. It started soft and gentle, like a whisper. Maya's fingers moved across the keys with a tenderness that made people hold their breath. The notes floated up toward the painted ceiling, wrapping around the crystal chandeliers, drifting past the marble columns. Then the melody began to build. The whisper became a voice. The voice became a cry. And the cry became something so powerful, so raw, so heartbreakingly beautiful that it stopped time itself. Maya played with her eyes closed. She didn't need to see the keys. She didn't need to see anything. The music was coming from somewhere deep inside her, from a place she had locked away 3 years ago and never thought she would find again. She was playing Chopin's Ballade Number 1. It was a piece that told a story without words. A story of love and loss, of hope and despair, of falling down and getting back up again. It was the perfect piece for this moment, though Maya hadn't chosen it consciously. Her fingers had chosen it for her. In the crowd, something was happening. The woman in diamonds, the one who had wrinkled her nose when Maya first sat down, was standing completely still. Her champagne glass was frozen halfway to her lips. Her mouth was slightly open, and there were tears rolling down her cheeks, cutting lines through her expensive makeup. She was thinking about her father. He had died when she was young, and she had spent her whole life trying to fill the hole he left behind. She had filled it with money and clothes and jewelry and status, but standing here, listening to this music, she realized none of it had worked. The hole was still there. It had always been there. A few feet away, the man in the expensive suit was crying too. He hadn't cried in 30 years. Not since he was a little boy and his mother told him that real men don't show their feelings. He had buried every emotion deep inside himself and built a wall around his heart. But this music was breaking through that wall. Note by note, it was cracking the stone and letting light pour in. He didn't understand what was happening to him. He just knew that he couldn't stop the tears, and for the first time in his life, he didn't want to. The security guard who had tried to throw Maya out was standing at the edge of the crowd, his radio forgotten in his hand. His tough expression had melted away completely. He was thinking about his daughter, the one he never got to see because he worked too many hours. He was thinking about all the bedtime stories he had missed, all the school plays he had skipped, all the moments that were gone forever. He made a silent promise to himself. Tomorrow, he would call her. Tomorrow, he would start making things right. All around the lobby, Similar things were happening. The music was reaching inside each person and touching something they had hidden away. Old wounds, buried memories, forgotten dreams, things they had been running from for years. Maya knew none of this. She was lost in a world of her own. In her mind, she was back in that tiny apartment in Brooklyn. She could smell her mother's cooking drifting in from the kitchen. She could hear her mother humming along to the melody. She could feel the warmth of being loved, of being safe, of being home. The music grew more intense. Maya's fingers flew across the keys faster and faster, building toward something big, something overwhelming. The notes crashed against each other like waves in a storm. The sound filled the lobby until it seemed like the walls themselves were vibrating. And then, at the very peak, when it seemed like the music couldn't get any more powerful, Maya did something unexpected. She slowed down. The crashing waves became gentle ripples. The storm faded into a sunset. The thunder turned into a soft rain, and the melody that emerged was the most beautiful thing anyone in that room had ever heard. It was simple. Just a few notes, repeated over and over, like a lullaby, like a mother singing to her child, like a goodbye that was also a promise. Maya was crying now. She could feel the tears streaming down her face, but she didn't stop playing. She couldn't stop. The music had taken control, and she was just along for the ride. She thought about her mother's last words, the promise that Maya would do great things, the belief that the whole world would know her name. For 3 years, she had thought that promise was broken. She had thought her mother was wrong, but maybe she wasn't. Maybe this was the beginning of something. Maybe this was the moment when Maya's life would finally start moving forward again. Maybe this cold, lonely chapter was coming to an end. The final notes of the piece hung in the air like snowflakes, delicate and perfect. And then there was silence. Maya's hands rested on the keys. Her eyes were still closed. Her face was wet with tears. She was afraid to open her eyes, afraid to see the looks of disgust and judgment, afraid to come back to reality. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. And then, someone started clapping. It was the elderly woman in the emerald gown. Grace. She brought her hands together once, twice, 3 times, the sound echoing through the quiet lobby like gunshots. Someone else joined in. Then another person. Then 10 more. Then 50. And suddenly the entire lobby exploded into applause. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't the kind of clapping people do at fancy parties because they're supposed to. This was real. This was raw. This was 200 people who had just experienced something that changed them, and they didn't know how else to respond. People were standing up. People were cheering. People were wiping their eyes and laughing at themselves for crying. The sound was so loud it bounced off the marble floors and the high ceilings, and came back twice as strong. Maya finally opened her eyes. She turned around on the bench and saw something she had never expected to see. She saw people looking at her. Really looking at her. Not through her, not past her, but directly at her. She saw respect in their eyes. She saw amazement. She saw tears. For 3 years, she had been invisible. For 3 years, no one had seen her. But now, everyone could see her. And what they saw was not a homeless girl in a dirty jacket. What they saw was not a problem to be removed or an eyesore to be ignored. What they saw was a human being. A person with a story, and a soul, and a gift that could move mountains. The applause went on and on. People pushed forward, wanting to get closer to her, wanting to tell her how beautiful that was, wanting to know who she was and where she had learned to play like that. Maya didn't know what to do. She felt overwhelmed and terrified and happy all at the same time. It was too much. Everything was too much. She looked for the one face in the crowd that had shown her kindness. The elderly woman in the emerald gown. Grace was still standing where she had been before, near the front of the crowd. She wasn't pushing forward like everyone else. She was just watching Maya with a gentle smile on her face. Their eyes met across the chaos, and Grace nodded. Just once. A small movement that said more than words ever could. It said, "I see you." It said, "You matter." It said, "Everything is going to be okay." Maya nodded back. And for the first time in 3 years, she believed it. The crowd was still cheering. People were still crying. The security guard was shaking his head in disbelief, a smile spreading across his face. The woman in diamonds was hugging a stranger next to her. The man in the expensive suit was openly sobbing and didn't care who saw. Something had shifted in that lobby. Something had changed. A homeless girl had walked in from the cold and asked 3 simple words. "Can I try?" And in doing so, she had reminded everyone in that room what it meant to be human. She had reminded them that beauty could come from anywhere. That talent didn't care about money or status or clean clothes. That sometimes the most extraordinary gifts came wrapped in the most ordinary packages. Maya didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if this moment would change her life or fade away like a dream. She didn't know if tomorrow she would be back on the streets, cold and invisible again. But right now, in this moment, she was seen. And that was enough. That was everything. 7 years later, Maya stood backstage at Lincoln Center, waiting for her cue. She could hear the crowd on the other side of the curtain. 2,000 people, all waiting to hear her play. Tickets had sold out in 11 minutes. Critics from every major newspaper were sitting in the front rows with their notebooks ready. Television cameras were set up to broadcast the concert live around the world. Maya Chen was no longer invisible. She was one of the most famous pianists on the planet, but she never forgot where she came from. Not for a single day. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift back to that night at the Grandview Hotel. The night that changed everything. The night she asked 3 simple words and got a second chance at life. After her performance that evening, the lobby had erupted into chaos. People were crying. People were cheering. People were pushing forward to get closer to her, to touch her, to ask who she was and where she had come from. Maya had sat frozen at the piano bench, overwhelmed and terrified. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know what was happening. For 3 years, no one had looked at her. Now suddenly everyone was looking, and it was too much. The elderly woman in the emerald gown had pushed through the crowd and taken Maya's hand. "Come with me, dear," she had said calmly. "Let's get you somewhere quiet." She led Maya through a side door and into a private office. The noise of the crowd faded behind them. Maya collapsed into a chair and burst into tears. She cried for 10 minutes straight. All the pain she had been holding inside came pouring out. She cried for her mother. She cried for the life she had lost. She cried for the 3 years of cold and hunger and loneliness. She cried until there was nothing left. The woman sat beside her the whole time, saying nothing, just holding her hand. When Maya finally stopped crying, the woman handed her a tissue and smiled gently. "Feel better?" she asked. Maya nodded. She felt empty, but in a good way. Like a weight had been lifted off her chest. "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard," the woman said. "And I have heard a lot of music in my life. Where did you learn to play like that?" Maya told her everything. She told her about discovering the piano at 4 years old. About the lessons her mother worked 2 jobs to pay for. About Carnegie Hall and the standing ovation and all the dreams she used to have. And then she told her about the illness and the bills and losing her mother and ending up on the streets with nothing. The woman listened without interrupting. When Maya finished, there were tears in the woman's eyes too. "My name is Grace," the woman said. "I own this hotel. My late husband and I built it together 40 years ago." She paused and looked at Maya with an expression that was hard to read. "I lost my own daughter when she was about your age. Car accident. 23 years ago, and I still think about her every single day." Maya didn't know what to say. She just listened. "She loved music too," Grace continued. "She played the violin. Not as well as you play piano. But she loved it. After she died, I couldn't listen to music for years. It hurt too much." She squeezed Maya's hand. "But tonight, listening to you play, I felt something I haven't felt in a very long time. I felt her with me again." Maya started crying again. So did Grace. They sat there together, 2 strangers connected by loss and music, and something neither of them could explain. "I want to help you," Grace said finally. "I don't know what your plans are, or what you want to do with your life. But I know talent when I see it. And you have more talent in your little finger than most people have in their entire body. Maya shook her head. I can't accept charity. I don't want anyone's pity. This isn't charity, Grace said firmly. And it's certainly not pity. This is an investment. I'm a businesswoman, Maya. I don't throw money away on lost causes. I invest in things that will grow, and you are going to grow into something extraordinary. I saw it tonight. Everyone in that lobby saw it. She offered Maya a deal. A place to stay, new clothes, meals, medical care, and a full scholarship to the Manhattan Conservatory of Music, one of the best music schools in the world, all paid for by the Grace Foundation, the charity Grace had started in her daughter's memory. The only thing I ask in return, Grace said, is that someday, when you're successful, you help someone else the way I'm helping you. Pay it forward. That's all I want. Maya wanted to say no. She had been on her own for so long that accepting help felt wrong. It felt dangerous. Every time she had trusted someone in the past 3 years, she had been hurt, but something in Grace's eyes told her this was different. This was real, so she said yes. The next few years were the hardest of Maya's life, but in a completely different way. She had to relearn how to be a person, how to sleep in a bed, how to eat regular meals, how to trust people, how to believe that good things could happen and not be taken away. And she had to relearn the piano. 3 years without practice had taken their toll. Her fingers were stiff. Her technique was rusty. There were days when she wanted to give up, when she felt like she would never be as good as she used to be. But she kept going. Every time she wanted to quit, she thought about her mother. She thought about Grace. She thought about all the people who had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. By 20, she was performing again. Small concerts at first, then bigger ones. Critics started noticing her. They called her a prodigy reborn. They called her the comeback story of the century. They called her a miracle. Maya didn't feel like a miracle. She just felt grateful, and she never forgot her promise to Grace. At 22, Maya started the Invisible Keys Foundation. It was a small organization at first, just Maya and 2 volunteers working out of a tiny office. Their mission was simple: find homeless youth with musical talent and give them the same chance Maya had been given. The first year, they helped 12 kids. The second year, they helped 40. By the 5th year, Invisible Keys had chapters in 15 cities and had helped over 500 young people get off the streets and into music programs. Maya visited shelters personally whenever she could. She would walk in with her old worn jacket, the same one she had been wearing that night at the Grandview Hotel, and she would sit down with kids who reminded her of herself. Kids who had been invisible for so long they had forgotten they existed. Everyone has music inside them, she would tell them. Sometimes, you just need someone to let you try. Now, standing backstage at Lincoln Center, Maya touched the worn jacket one more time. She kept it in her dressing room at every concert. A reminder of where she came from. A reminder of who she used to be. The stage manager appeared beside her. 2 minutes, Miss Chen. Maya nodded. She took a deep breath and looked at the photograph she always carried with her. Her mother, smiling, taken the day of the Carnegie Hall concert. The last time they had both been truly happy. I made it, Mom, Maya whispered. I did great things. Just like you said I would. She tucked the photo back into her pocket and walked toward the stage. The curtain rose. The spotlight hit her. 2,000 people began to applaud. Maya sat down at the piano and placed her fingers on the keys. And just before she began to play, she thought about a cold February night 7 years ago. A night when a homeless girl walked into a hotel where she didn't belong and asked a question that changed her life forever. Can I try? 3 words. That was all it took. 3 words, and a stranger kind enough to say yes. Maya smiled, closed her eyes, and began to play. And somewhere in the audience, in the front row, an 89-year-old woman in an emerald gown wiped tears from her eyes. Just like she did at every single one of Maya's concerts. just like she would until the very end.